a whole lot of people to make this happen. Amen. Connor Porter, as mentioned by Josh Worthen, is our guest speaker and preacher tonight. He's a great young man. Arlington High School, as he mentioned, we celebrated his graduation with other seniors earlier this month. He's off to be a Baylor Bear in Brazos country coming up later this year. The story of Johnny and Kathy Stevens is a great story. The story of Connor in that family is a great story. He's a sharp cookie, and he's got a great head on his shoulder for remarkable self-awareness for his age. Would you welcome Connor Porter to the first Oasis service tonight? Connor, we're proud of you. We're glad to have you. Our only dream regarding you is don't go into professional wrestling broadcasting, okay?
All right, can everyone hear me? All right, I think the mic is on. I am going to be pulling double duty tonight. I'm going to be reading the scripture for my message, and I'm also going to be doing the message as well. And I just want to say it is an honor and privilege to be participating in this first Oasis service, and I want to thank Josh Worthen and Pastor Marc for helping me and working together with me on this message. So thank you for that. So the scripture for tonight is from Matthew 11, verses 1 through 10. Now, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and proclaim his message in their cities. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out to the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you.'" My message tonight is all about expectations. I feel this is especially appropriate for me, as many of you, I'm sure, likely have expectations about how well or not so well this may go. Fortunately, especially among my generation, social media provides us with a global platform from which anyone can voice their preconceived notions for virtually everything. This allows not only experts to give educated predictions with uncanny speed, but also armchair critics to become household names for a few hours, confirming many people's hidden belief that their opinion, in whatever situation, must not be ignored. This connectivity that technology offers, permitting the formation of group expectations of an historic scale and power, was especially relevant for me on a certain Friday evening in October. That evening was the night of the football game between my school, Arlington High, and Arlington Martin, our main rival. On the days leading up to the game, I was constantly checking my Twitter feed to see what the expectations of sports journalists, coaches, and players were, and the information I consumed said one thing: Martin would lose. Martin had never lost to Arlington, at least since I had been in high school, so it was almost a miracle in the actual game when the Colts were in the lead. However, the fourth quarter saw some interceptions and turnovers on downs, which led to Martin's victory. I was stunned. My expectation was not met, to say the least. And when I realized this, I, who was still standing with the other band members in the stands, decided to let out my frustration. I grabbed my water bottle for the game, filled almost halfway, and angrily slammed it on the top of my snare drum, drenching everyone around me. My fellow band members looked at me in fear and surprise, and my percussion director, Mr. Lowe, sternly commanded me to go over to him. Mr. Lowe told me that I was not representing the spirit of the band, and that, had our head director been at the game, I would have likely been kicked out of the program. And that was the only game where my head director, Mr. Haney, was not present. So I got really lucky. At the time, I just could not believe, from everything I heard and expected to happen, that a loss would be the result of the game. When I found the scripture that was read to us this evening, I was struck by Jesus' response to John the Baptist's messengers and Jesus' address to the crowd regarding their expectations of him. As Jesus had advised the apostles about the plans for spreading his ministry, no doubt many of the followers of Jesus began forming expectations of what he would do, although many of these expectations were likely not met. When John the Baptist's disciples encountered the unassuming, plainly dressed Jesus spreading the word of the Lord to ordinary people in the wilderness, as opposed to a formally dressed nobleman preaching on a podium before the learned men of a large city, they doubted if Jesus was the Messiah which John thought he was. Instead of following the expectations of a messianic warrior king who would free the Jews from oppression, Jesus discusses the various miracles he performed for common people over the course of his ministry to confirm to the messengers that John the Baptist was right in his faith, and even praises him for it, which I think was Jesus' recognition of the skepticism John must have heard from his own followers. Similarly, Jesus speaks to the crowd regarding the traditional expectations of a Messiah and contrasts them to his own location and actions, but still references the prophet Malachi to assuage his skeptics. I suggest that Jesus uses Malachi's prophecy in his speech to the crowd to hint that the expectations regarding the Jewish Messiah were correct, but not in a way that many people expected it to be. Jesus was preparing the way for the kingdom, not by military conquest, but by spreading the knowledge of the grace and mercy of God to as many people as possible before his death, to make the world closer in character to the kingdom above. Another powerful event in which expectations were not met occurred in the life of John Wesley. Upon returning to England disappointed with his missionary efforts in the New World colony of Georgia, the deeply depressed Wesley was invited to attend an evening meeting of Moravian Christians in May of 1738 at Aldersgate Street in London. John likely did not have high hopes of the meeting in terms of its religious impact on him, as according to his journal, he went very unwillingly to it. And let me tell you, after being dragged to church not a few times over the years, I can definitely understand John's frustration. At the meeting, however, Wesley felt his heart strangely warmed by the presence of God. Wesley finally felt the love of God after having experienced it only in the intellectual sense up to that point. It appears that the religious gathering at Aldersgate Street became an opportunity for him to grow closer to God once Wesley's low expectations did not match with the importance of the meeting to his faith. And Aldersgate Sunday is celebrated in the Methodist Church every year, and it was, in fact, last Sunday. I found that out while I was researching this. That's pretty cool. From my anger at an event I never saw coming, to Jesus critiquing the preconceived notions of the Jewish Messiah, to a dramatic change along John Wesley's faith journey, despite his initial reluctance. Expectations are highly important to virtually any situation, but, I suggest, especially in our spiritual lives. Whether our expectations are exceeded, not met, or turn out exactly as we thought, I encourage all of us to reflect on what God could be trying to tell us. Practicing this skill is not difficult in almost any instance because we have great expectations. Thank you.